So the Lammy review has finally come out, and this is a review by the MP, the Labour Party MP for Tottenham, David Lammy, or it's got his name on it. I doubt that he actually wrote the thing, but it's a review into alleged racism in the criminal justice system. And I'm not going to cover it in great depth. I haven't read the whole review. I've seen a lot of the coverage on it. Predictably, a lot of it focuses on, spins it as saying it's evidence of racism, it's clear racism, institutional racism. And then there's some coverage on the other side, which is pointing out that just because you have disparities in the criminal justice system, so just because, for example, the percentage of prisoners who are black and minority ethnic, so-called, is higher than the percentage of the population as a whole that's black and minority ethnic, doesn't necessarily mean it's racism. It could be caused by increased levels of criminality amongst certain groups. But putting that aside, I want to talk about two things which jumped out at me as being really interesting about this review. First of all, the review says something really quite it's quite shocking to me to see this, in this review. I'm going to read out the section I'm talking about. It's about responsibility. And it says here, a growing body of scientific evidence suggests that not only children, but many young adults lack the maturity to make effective, balanced decisions. This includes abilities like judging risk, delaying gratification, and mastering their own impulses. Furthermore, there's evidence to suggest that things like traumatic brain injury and maltreatment as a child can further contribute to limited maturity, and additionally, that these problems are frequently seen amongst young adult offenders. In other countries, such as Germany, for example, understanding of maturity is fundamental. In contrast to England and Wales, where there is an inflexible boundary between adult and youth justice systems, the German justice system allows for juvenile law to be applied to young adults if the moral and psychological development of the defendant suggests that he or she is like a juvenile. In England and Wales, our approach to assessing maturity should reflect the scientific evidence. As with Germany, rigorous assessments of maturity should inform rehabilitative interventions. This approach should apply to all those up to the age of 21. And anyway, it carries on and carries on. I'll read this last bit. It says, the Ministry of Justice and the Department of Health should work together to develop a method to assess maturity. The results of this assessment should inform interventions, including extending the support structures of the youth justice system for offenders over the age of 18 who are judged to have low levels of maturity. There are particularly high proportions of black and minority ethnic individuals among young adult prisoners. A more developed approach to maturity could make a big contribution to their rehabilitation. Now, isn't this fascinating? Basically, what he's saying here is that, some of the people who are being tried as adults are not mature enough to be tried as adults. To quote these people, he says the scientific evidence shows that a lot of young people who are over the age of 18 are lagging behind when it comes to their mental development, basically, their intelligence, their emotional intelligence. So as he says here, the ability to make effective, balanced decisions, to judge risk, delay gratification, master their own impulses, and so forth. And then he talks about how traumatic brain injury and maltreatment as a child can further contribute to limited maturity. And then basically he goes on to say that, looking at how high the proportion of black and minority ethnic youth offenders is and younger offenders in the adult population, he suggests that if the criminal justice system would actually say, no, just because you're 18 doesn't mean we're going to try you as an adult. We're going to test your maturity to see if you're at the required level, to determine whether we'll treat you as an adult. Now, isn't that interesting? For one thing, this to me kind of starts to play into some of the things that race realists might say and others, which is that, when you think of Hegel, the German philosopher from I think the 1800s, and he said, yeah, black people basically are like children. They're childlike. They're not mentally developed, and so on and so forth. They're kind of simple. Doesn't this kind of play into that? Suggesting that, because the fact that it's been raised in this report into racism in the criminal justice system, and it says itself that if the criminal justice system took this approach to, maturity, judging maturity, it would help to make a big difference to the basically the overrepresentation of black and minority ethnic people in the criminal justice system. To bring it up and to say that, to me, opens up dangerous, is a very provocative thing to do, because it opens up a can of worms as far as, well, what are you saying? Are you saying that black and minority ethnic people are basically slower to develop their intellectual, mental and emotional faculties? So that's I find that really interesting. And think about it, imagine if they did bring this in, and imagine if they did adopt the German system of saying, okay, well, we'll assess their maturity and then we'll judge them accordingly. And imagine if it came out that, after a few years of doing this, imagine if it came out that black offenders or black defendants were far more likely to be judged to be immature and lacking those cognitive and reasoning capabilities and so forth than others. Imagine if that came out. What would that mean for people like David Lammy and the race grievance industry? What would that mean? Would that mean that, well, maybe there was something in what these race realists are saying, Or would it mean, no, this is actual even more evidence of racism because black people are being stereotyped as being simple and not developing? Do you see where I'm going with that? Very interesting, very strange, a very interesting can of worms, I think, that David Lammy has opened there, because it kind of does start to get into the question of, well, why are so many black boys in particular involved in criminality? Why do so many of them, is it the case that, it's not just racism, but actually that part of the reason that so many black boys in particular are involved in crime is to do with something in them, as far as their cognitive and reasoning capabilities goes, as well as the other things like childhood. He mentions the review mentions childhood trauma, mistreatment like a child, and traumatic brain injury. Now, mistreatment as a child, that's something that I think we do need to talk about. We do need to look at the context and the environment in which black children are being raised. The fact that, for example, so many of them are raised by single parents. What kind of violence is being inflicted on them when you think about beating? What are too many black children getting? Are enough black children getting a nurturing environment in their homes and this kind of thing? All of these questions, these are very dangerous questions to be opened up here in this Lammy review. So that's the first thing. I'll be really interested to hear what people think about that, actually. And then following on from that, I'm really pleased actually at the other thing in this same section. The other thing that the Lammy review brought up is indeed to do with family, and it says, let's have a look here. It says, following directly on from that bit about the recommendation about maturity and judging maturity, it says as follows. This is on page 42. It says, for young offenders, it is also clear that some of the key tools at the disposal of youth courts are not being used. For example, parenting orders are designed to give courts the tools both to challenge and support parents. Ooh. Courts can require parents to attend counselling or guidance sessions designed to improve parenting skills, manage difficult adolescent behaviour, and ensure school attendance. But courts can also impose a second element, requiring parents to exercise control over their child's behaviour. Last year, the youth courts issued parenting orders in just 60 cases involving black and minority ethnic young people. In total, just 189 parenting orders were issued for all ethnicities, including white young people, despite 55,000 young offenders being found guilty in courts. It's clear that youth offending teams have little faith in the efficacy of parenting orders and are discouraging their use as a result. But the answer is not to give up on parenting orders altogether. It is to make sure that they are well designed, clearly evidence alternatives to them. The Ministry of Justice should review the effectiveness of parenting orders and replace them with something better if there are flaws with them. Youth offending teams should not only contribute to this process, but also consider whether they are doing enough to challenge and support parents. Really interesting. I can't actually remember any official government reports or whatnot into racism and so forth that even bother to mention parenting. So to me, as kind of round the houses as this is, and I'm going to chat about that in a minute, this is a positive development that parents, black and minority ethnic parents, are finally being talked about. Because for me, as you know, I think that is the root of all of these problems to do with criminality in the black community. It's to do with parenting, the choices that parents are making. How many of these children's parents themselves are barely children? How many of these children's parents are, themselves lack the reasoning skills, the deferring of gratification and so forth? How many of these parents are challenging their children to live upright? How many of these parents are making those important life decisions to set their children up for success, as opposed to just, dare I say, a lot of these parents settling for sponging off the state. Not all of them, but a lot of them, I'm afraid. I've seen it. I see it around me. So really interesting stuff. I mean, first of all, look how many, although there are only 189 parenting orders were issued altogether, more than a third of about a third of them were for black and minority ethnic young people. So that reflects the disproportionality of black and minority ethnic youth offenders, generally speaking. But obviously, I said it's a round the houses kind of indirect way of talking about it. The key thing here, of course, is never mind the criminal justice system punishing parents. And I think I agree wholeheartedly with that. Parents need to get punished along with their children, or in some cases instead of their children, when children are going astray. They need to be held to account. For example, are there ways that things like benefits can be stopped, or that kind of thing? This needs to happen. I'm sick and tired of black parents of wayward black children getting away with their not being held to account for their responsibility to look after their children. Not to say that it's always the parents' fault, of course. I know for a fact that there are situations where the parents have done everything that they possibly could, but the child's just a wrong one. But the key thing here is that, to close for me, is that, as interesting as all of this Lammy review is and blah blah blah, the key thing is black parents. We need to sort our shit out. Pardon my French. We are the ones who can. We are the only people, black people, and in particular black parents, black families. It's us. We are the only ones who can restore our boys in particular. We're the only ones who can bring about a better world for them. We're the only ones who can do that. There's no point in appealing to the state. There's no point in appealing to the police, to the magistrates, to judges, to this, that, and the other. By all means, that stuff's interesting and important. To make sure that the system that we have, that we pay for with our taxes, is fit for purpose, and it isn't placing any extra additional burdens on people just because of their race or gender. But ultimately, it's got to come down to the parents, and as I say, things like the super high proportion of black children who are being brought up by single parents and so forth, that has got to be looked at, and we've got to find ways to do it. What I've found, unfortunately, is that amongst a lot of black people who are concerned about the issues facing us as a collective, and unfortunately most of them do not want to speak them harsh words that are needed to be spoken about the criminality, about the bad parenting, about the things like the drug use, about the culture that we have, about even talking about things like beating children, even talking about things like all of these things, all of these factors that we have control over. Unfortunately, not enough of us are talking about it. And you know what it comes down to? I tweeted about this recently as well. It basically comes down to not wanting to take accountability and responsibility for anything, and placing all of the blame for all of our problems at the feet of the system, and in particular at the feet of white supremacy. It's a shame. But in summary, some interesting things so far that I've seen in this Lammy review. Maybe if you've read the whole review, and you've seen other things, then holler at me and let me know. But those are the two things I'll be really interested to hear people's thoughts on, particularly that thing about immaturity. You know, am I right in saying that the Lammy review has perhaps opened a bit of a can of worms with this idea of differential treatment of offenders based on their alleged immaturity? Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care. See you soon.